Welcome back to another video where I spend my hard-earned money on some cheap Chinese tools. In this video, I bought 6 tools, all for the cost of less than £20 each. Previously in my videos, I've been doing tools for less than £10. We're raising that budget this time and we're doing it for less than 20. A quick disclaimer before we start. I'm not associated with TEMU, I'm not sponsored. All of these things have been purchased with my own money. That being said, let's get into it. The first thing we've got is this electric screwdriver. This only came in at a cost of £10.19. I actually got this with a coupon and I think it actually only costed me £2 in the end, but the actual listen is £10.19. You know you're getting yourself a good quality tool when it just says cordless screwdriver and it's not actually a named brand. Comes with a USB-C charging port and it does come with a USB-C cable, which is good. Got the top arrow here, which rotates it clockwise, and the down arrow, which turns it anti-clockwise. You've got a torque setting at the bottom here, so I've just put that on max. This torque setting only applies to when you're turning it clockwise. So you've got low torque there, and still the same high torque when you're in reverse. Got 2 little torches at the end of here, which is pretty decent. It does only come with 2 heads though, which is a Phillips and a flathead, which is a bit annoying because the only screws I've got are posi drive. It does feel quite surprisingly well built for what it is. Like there's no like loose parts, anything like that. Bits of plastic that will break off. Can't feel anything like that, and you've got nice rubber grips. So it's looking good so far, but let's actually try it out. It does actually look like it's got a magnetic tip. That's pretty cool. So the first thing I'm going to use it for is just my router plate for my router. So not bad. It's doing good so far. Nice. That was pretty smooth. And that's really what this is designed for, just for like small screws that already have pre-drilled holes. See if I can turn the torque up a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it works exactly as it should, really. The only thing I'm finding with this is that if you've got it set to a high torque setting, it almost jars your wrist like a kickback. Once it starts to really put pressure on that screw, it will kick back the tool. And if you're not expecting it, if you've got bad wrists, that might actually catch you off guard. I mean, that's kind of normal for what the tool is, but it's just something that you need to be aware of in case you've got bad wrists or anything like that. Overall, I think this is probably worth the price. When you type in on TEMU for a cordless screwdriver, you're probably going to get about 50 of this exact same thing. It's definitely one of them generic, unbranded items that loads of companies just sell. In fact, for the price of what I paid for this, which is £10.19, you could probably find this exact one, which comes with more bits than this one came with because it only came with 2. The battery life, I don't really know how good the battery life is. There's no way to check on the tool how long it lasts. I do like that it's USB-C. Nothing annoys me more in 2025 than a USB or a micro USB cable. For what it is, it's worth it. Again, you're not going to be driving screws in with this thing. This is designed to assemble kits, things like small bolts, small screws when you're assembling like desks, things like that. I'd recommend it for the price. It was only £10.19, but you're not going to be doing anything professional with that. The next thing we've got are these aluminium gauge blocks, or some people might call them setup blocks. And these came in at a cost of £17.14. You've probably seen these before on different YouTube channels. They're designed to help set up certain tools. Routers are pretty good to use, so you can set the certain depth of that. Table saws, you can set how high you want the blade. Drill presses are also pretty good. I don't have one, but you can use it to set the depth of your drill press, which is pretty ideal. So you get 17 pieces within the box. 15 of them are rectangular shaped and the other 2 are circular shaped. We'll start off with the biggest one. So it's a 1x2 by 2.5 inch. You've probably seen other YouTubers testing a 1x2 by 3. Is exactly what it is. It's just a block of aluminium and it should be exactly 1x2 by 2.5. So let's just try that out. This should be 2.5. Yeah, it looks about right. This should be 1 inch. Looks about right, and then this should be 2. Good. You do have measurings on here, which we'll just test as well. Yeah, looks pretty good. All of the blocks have the equations on them. They predominantly start with the imperial equation and then they get converted into millimeters, and they're all similarly like that. So this is a 23 and 32 32nd. Man, I hate this sort of formula. I don't know why Americans use this. And that equates to 18.25625, in case you're wondering. And it just goes all the way down until this itty bitty one, which is a 1/16 of an inch, which equates to that. And it's got that really nice red finish to it, which I can only imagine is to try and look like a woodpecker's tool, which is good because in my feature videos, I can pretend to look like I know what I'm doing. I've got nothing bad to say about these. They do exactly as they should. I would have liked a metric version of these and then have that converted into inches, because I do predominantly use millimeters, but hey ho, beggars can't be choosers. I am going to recommend them. The next thing I've got is this thin rip jig for the table saw or bandsaw, and this only came at a cost of £16.16. If you've never seen one of these before, these are super handy to have, especially if you're making things like cutting boards and you want lots of strips of wood. This will help you make repeated cuts, which are all the same width. It looks really nice. It feels very well built. It's got that really nice brushed red aluminium finish to it. You've got plastic knobs here which you can turn, and that's what you use to feed into your table saw. We've got this, I think it's like brass knob here, which you undo, and that's what you use to move the jig left or right, and that's what alters the width of the strips that you're going to make. So to use this, you're going to undo both these knobs here, and that way it loosens the rail, and that way you can slide it into your table saw. It fits in a standard table saw T-slot, which for me is 19 millimeters across by 10 millimeters in depth. Once you've got it in the slot, you now need to set it up in front of the blade. Now, just a quick safety warning, you want to set this up maybe about 3 or 4 inches in front of the blade. You don't want to have it next to the blade, because then when you go to run a piece of wood through, you risk binding it with the jig and the blade, and you're probably going to get some kind of nasty kickback. And once you set that up, you can then tighten the plastic knobs back down, and then hopefully this shouldn't move back and forth, which is good. So you want to figure out what size width strips that you want. You can play it by eye if you want, if you don't need to be too technical. However, if you're looking for a specific size, then you might find this tip quite handy. If I actually loosen these knobs again, push it up further against the blade, remember these stop blocks? I'm actually going to put it up against the blade, and then I'm going to push the bearings of the jig up against it, tighten the brass knob down, take the stop block away, and then I'm going to bring the whole jig back, tighten the plastic knobs again. So now I should be able to make 1/4 inch strips. So let's give that a go. Get your wood, butt it up against the fence, and then you're going to butt it up against the bearings of that jig. Lock your fence down, and let's give that a go. So that's the first cut. So I'm then going to put the wood piece up against the fence again, and then I'm going to push the wood up against that jig again. And when I make my next cut, it should still be a 1/4 inch. And then there you go. I've got 4 strips, all at a 1/4 inch each. It's good. For what this is, I'm 100% going to recommend this. I think every woodworker should have one of these in the shop. This tied in with the setup blocks was just so simple to use. I've got 4 pieces of 1/4 inch strips here. You know, I can't fault it whatsoever. I think this is actually a really good tool, especially for the money. There are different varieties on TEMU. Make sure you get a semi-decent one, because the cheaper ones might only have like a singular bearing. This one has 2, so there's more surface area to actually go against the wood. So it's a lot better in that respect. For what it is, I'm going to recommend it. The next thing I've got is this Chisel sharpening kit, and this came in at a cost of £14.03. So the first thing out of this kit is the actual clamp guide or the honing guide itself. It is designed where you place your chisel in between the jaws of the clamp, and then you can tighten that up, and then you can use these bearings here as a guide, and you can use it against a sharpening stone, and that way you can get a consistent sharpen to your edge here. The maximum width of the jaws is around 6.5 centimeters. You probably won't want to go any further than that, but that should fit not only chisels but also your plane irons. Now these bearings here, they move back and forth, so that way when you run the guide up and down the sharpening stone, this can actually help you move along. The only issue I found with this is that as you're going to be using it, it's going to be unscrewing itself. All it is just a bolt. So once they get unscrewed enough, they're going to get floppy, and they might even fall out whilst using it. So that just seems a bit of a flaw to me. Now you do get 2 larger brass bearings, and that's more designed if you're using a large plane iron such as this. You can swap these out and use these instead, and that way you got more surface area because of just how wide the jaws are. We'll see how good that actually lasts, but straight away that seems a bit of a flaw, but we'll see. Now you don't have to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So there are countersunk holes where you can actually screw in a couple of screws to your workpiece. It does come with the screws as well actually, which is a bonus. So I'm just going to do that real quick. So the base is all screwed down. You can see that there's loads of different angles here, going from 15 all the way to a maximum of around 47. Now it's all up for debate here, but most of the time for things like chisels, you're probably going to be looking at a 25 degree with a 30 degree micro bevel. Again, it's up for debate. I'm sure some will tell me off in the comments, but hey ho. We're going to put it into the clamp. Don't tighten it all the way, just so it's a little bit firm. And then I'm going to push the base and the clamp together, and then I'm going to push it up to the 25 degree line, and then tighten this clamp back down again, actually lock it into place. And then this is the last thing out of the box. So this is just a guide. So all you do is you'd put your chisel blade or your plane iron into the gaps, and it will tell you roughly what the angles are of it. I can't say I'd ever use this, providing that you're relying on the actual base plate itself when you set it up, then I don't really think this is relevant at all. Once I've got the certain angle of my chisels or plane irons, I won't need to see this, because as long as they work well, and I always refer to this when I resharpen them, then I don't really see much point in that. Right, so I'm just going to use the Scary Sharp system, which is pretty much just sandpaper stuck down to a piece of float glass. That's exactly what I thought was going to happen. So that, one of the bearings just came off. That's exactly what I feared was going to happen. That's a little bit annoying. So it does give you an Allen key to actually tighten these up. However, if you tighten them up too much, then you actually lose the movability of them. They just get stuck down, and then you're not rolling it, you're kind of just dragging it. Now you might say, well, why don't you put the chisel in through the other direction, and then that way when the bearings are rolling, they're tightening up rather than loosening. That is a good point, but then you're just going to get the same problem where the bearings get too tight, and then you're wearing down the bearings because of the sandpaper and they're just not moving. So it's either you put it in one direction, they get loose and the bearings come off, or you put the chisel in through the other direction and the bearings just get worn down over time, they no longer roll. You can't really win. Oh, that's just come loose. Oh, okay. And even the bearing came away again, look, you can see there. I need to use an Allen key and tighten that down again. So I did a bit more sharpening with it. The chisel just kept coming out. The bearings kept falling out. So I thought with the bearings, I'll tighten them down as much as I can. But the issue I got with that is the bearings no longer rolled. And that is the whole reason for the bearings. So instead they were getting dragged. And because they were getting dragged along sandpaper, the bearings were actually getting sanded away. They were losing their shape. So that wasn't a way forward and how to solve this problem. The chisel's fallen out of this thing. I think the only way you could fix that is if there was a slot where you tighten it up, and that way you can actually get more pressure, more sort of torque on that chisel, because just putting it in and using your hand and finger tightening it, it just isn't enough. It cannot hold that chisel. So you're really delicately touching the chisel the whole time because you're just scared that it's going to fall out, and then you have to set it all up again. Really, it was not an enjoyable experience. My one that was actually cheaper worked better than this, so I'm not going to recommend this. The base, which tells you what angles to set up at, if you were to buy that by itself, I would recommend it. But in terms of actually buying the whole kit, you know, with all this involved, I don't think it's worth it at all. I'm not going to use that. The next thing I've got is this Scriber. Now this came in at a cost of £16.41, so it's a little bit more expensive than your traditional Scriber. There is reason for it. There are a few features to this that might interest you. So this is the Scriber in question, and first impressions, it looks absolutely beautiful. I love the contrast of the brass, the black and the silver. Looks really good, and it feels and looks very well built, all made of metal. Now if you look closely, you can see that there's numbers here all up until 12 centimeters. Now if we look a little bit more closely here, you can see that it shows you what number we're currently at, and that shows you the depth of what the blade's set to. So if I just loosen that, I can move the rod back and forth, and let's say we want a depth of 2 centimeters, get it to 2, and then I can lock that back down, and then that's the distance between the blade and the base here. You can do it that way manually, or you can actually loosen this lever again. That way it moves back and forth. But then if you tighten this brass knob down here, even though this is unlocked, the rod can no longer move, and then you will use this little knob to actually micro measure and get that spot on. So let's say if we're going for exactly 2, I'll rotate this knob, and then I can get to 2 that way, and then lock that back down, and that should in theory be bang on 2 centimeters in depth. So if I just use the Scriber here, that little mark should be 2 centimeters. So let's just quickly try that. Yeah, 2 centimeters. So it is accurate. Now the reason why I think that's a bit of a gimmick is that this tool's been around for hundreds of years, and there's nothing stopping you from just getting a tape measure or calipers and just measuring it that way. So if we just unlock it again, and this time I'm just going to measure my tape measure, see if we can get it just as accurate. So we're going to go for, let's go for 4 centimeters this time. Right, so it's just about there. So now there should be approximately 4 centimeters. So let's give that a go. Yeah, so we're pretty much exactly the same, and that's why it could be seen as a gimmick, especially if you're an experienced woodworker. You might just think that micro measurement thing isn't really required. You can always just go back to basics and just use a tape measure or calipers, but for a beginner, I suppose that might be pretty useful. And if you just wanted an explanation as to why scribing is sometimes better than a pencil line, it just allows the chisel to find that little groove there, so you don't put it in at a wonk. So if you see, if I just bring my chisel across here, it catches in that little lip, and then you can raise the chisel up, hammer it down, and then it'll be perfectly on that line there. So it should be all consistent, and it'll just help guide the chisel a little bit better. Overall, I think this is a really nice bit of kit. It just looks good and it's very well made. I can't give it any flaws whatsoever. I think the features with the micro measuring are really handy to use, especially if you're a beginner or you don't have access to a tape measure or calipers. I also think it's going to come up for debate with the, old sweats of woodworking who are going to say, well, just stick a tape measure to it and measure it that way, the old school way. The way people have been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years prior to this little tool. I do get the debate, and what I'm gonna say is, if you like fancy tools and you just want a really quick ease of use and you don't have to use a tape measure, then by all means I would recommend this. But also consider that this tool costs twice as much as a regular scribe, which still has the numbers on the rod. You just don't have the ability to do that micro measurement with that brass knob. It's subjective. Some people might hate it, some people might swear by it. So I'm going to recommend it, but just know that there are scrubbers out there that are half the price of this. And then the last one we've got is this pocket hole jig. Now this only came in at a cost of £16.22. Now if you've seen my previous TEMU videos, you'll remember I've tested a pocket hole jig for less than £10, which was probably one of the worst things I've actually ever bought. So it's going to be interesting to see what the next step up in their designs for under £20 are going to be. So let's just see what's actually in the box. So to start off, we've got the pocket hole jig itself. Now, first of all, my first impressions of it is that it does actually look really nice and it feels a lot better than the one I tested last time. It's got that red sort of brushed aluminium look to it with the brass knobs that you guys know I just love. Loosen the brass knobs, you can raise it up or down. That's where it will change how high the pocket hole drills will come into that piece of wood. Just for now, I'm going to leave it in the bottom position. If you've never seen one of these before, they're what you use to drill pocket holes for things like cabinets, joints, things like that. That's what this is used for, and you'll see later in a minute how it all gets put together. We've got the bolt here, which has no quick release lever or anything like that. It does have a hard plastic end to it, just so it sort of reduces the impact on the wood. And you've got 3 screw holes, so you can put it down and screw it into your work surface. And then to finish up, you've got the 2 holes where you put the drill in. The maximum thickness of wood you'll be able to put in is only around 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches, so it's not as wide as your conventional pocket hole jigs. And then you've got one of the drill bits, which to be honest, I don't think is anything special. Does also come with the actual collet, the depth stop bit, which you can tie against that drill bit, so you can actually set the depth stop on the drill, which is common in these sort of kits. Does also come with the Allen key, which is good. Got a handful of pocket hole screws, and also I always forget what these are called. These are almost the plugs or adapters that also go into the holes. I don't actually know what they're called, so I'm sure someone will tell me. And then to screw in the screws, you've got this Phillips bit here, which just seems like your generic bit. Right, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it up. So put the drill bit in, I'm gonna get my stop block or collet, whatever it's called. And then I'm just gonna drop it down. And I wanna raise that drill bit just ever so slightly. Usually the way I do it is maybe like a 2p coin, just something where it just lifts it off just slightly, doesn't have to be off much, just so you don't drill into the metal really. And then just tighten that stop block against the drill, and that should stop you from going into the metal, which is good, it's working so far. Take the drill bit out, put it into the drill. Yeah, it would be nice to have some kind of quick release lock, but hey ho. Tighten that up. I'm not going to screw this down to my workbench purely because I don't want to. Well, I can tell you straight away that's a lot better than that previous one I got. Oh yeah, that's miles better. We've got a bit of sort of tear out here, which you can probably just pick away with a chisel or just a bit of sandpaper. It's not the end of the world. It has actually made a fairly smooth pocket hole other than that. If you don't know why I'm bringing the drill bit back in and out as I'm using it, it's just so I can clear out that drill bit so it doesn't get clogged up full of dust. The one thing I didn't mention is that there are actually 2 sort of vents, 2 holes here, which actually release some of that dust. So you don't really have to do that. That's just a habit I've got into with my original one I've bought. In terms of a result, they all seem to have the same sort of thing where there's a little bit of sort of tear out here. Again, chisel that and you're probably as good as gold, but let's try and screw that in. One of the things I would have liked is a clamp like this, which comes with my current trend pocket hole jig, which just helps keep the pieces together. Let's see how this gets on. You know what? I am actually quite impressed with that. But this is actually a really good result. I am impressed. So yeah, just to sort of chisel away these little bits of tear out, I think that's done a pretty decent job, in all fairness to it. So if you look down here, you can see that the drill bit's actually caught itself on the jig a little bit here. And if you remember the first jig I tested, that was a massive issue because the drill bit wouldn't actually go any deeper because it was catching on the lip that it made itself. It's kind of chipped it away. You could hear the metal scraping when I was using it, but now that it's cleared its own path, it no longer gets in the way. So overall, I think this is a good little piece of kit. It's compact. It's not as big as my Trend pocket hole jig. If I compare the two, you can see that the Trend's an absolute monster. Just a bit of a comparison here. This Trend has that quick release clamp, which I was telling you about. It's a lot easier to adjust. And there's a few other things here which just gives it a bit more adaptability than the TEMU version, but this costs around 50 to 60 pounds and the TEMU one only costs 16 pounds 22 pence. You know, there's a huge difference there in costs. The Trend does come with its own clamp, which I would 100% recommend if you are doing pocket holes, but there's nothing to say you can't just buy a knockoff version of these because, you know, there's not a huge difference in between the cheap ones then to the branded ones. So I'd recommend the TEMU version. Get yourself one of these clamps. I forget what they're called, but I'm sure you'll find them if you type in pocket hole jig clamp. And yeah, I'm gonna recommend it. And that is the end of the video. We had some really good tools here, especially ones that I would recommend in a professional setting, being the thin rip jig along with the gauge blocks. I think you'd need them in any kind of workshop, so I would 100% recommend them. The other things, you know, were okay. They're kind of what you get for what you pay for them, if you know what I mean. But overall, I think we've got some good products here. If you can afford to buy professional grade products and you work as a professional, then obviously buy the professional stuff. The tools that I'm showing in these videos here are purely just a comparison to see if you're a DIY, if you're someone that doesn't spend a lot of time in the workshop, you just need to buy like a pocket hole jig for a once in a month project, then that's kind of what these are aimed for. They're not aimed for professionals in comparisons to, you know, the highest top tier brands there are on the market. It's also worth noting again that all of these tools have been purchased with my own money. I'm not sponsored. I will leave links to all the products in the description below. I'm not getting any commission or anything like that. I'm purely just putting the links to the products there. Also, another disclaimer that the time of buying the tools to film in is probably around a month. So the prices might be lower, they might be higher, or the product might not even be on the website anymore, because sometimes that's a thing. But if you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. We've just hit 3,000 subscribers, which is very cool. In terms of my future videos, I might only do a few more TEMU videos. They tend to be the only thing that's getting really popular on my channel at the moment, which is great, but I don't want to deter from actually making cool projects so I can show you guys as well. So after this video, I'm going to show you a project that I'm building, and I'm building a new epoxy desk, which is going to look absolutely cool. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.